Tonight, a new rift opens up in the Labour Party over the Home Secretary's plans on immigration. Former Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner calls Shabana Mahmood's policies un-British. Is this the battle for the soul of the Labour Party, or the starting gun on a battle for Downing Street? Also, we speak to the only senior Labour politician to call on the Prime Minister to go, with Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar telling Sky News he wasn't part of a coup. Also tonight, Zask Polanski sets out his plan to tackle what he calls rip-off Britain. But do the Greens' economic policies add up to a credible plan for government? As Nigel Farage calls on the government to fully exploit the North Sea. Is drill, baby, drill the answer to the UK's energy problem? After Donald Trump joked about a united Ireland, was it anything more than presidential banter? We speak to Northern Ireland's Deputy First Minister. And as the Canadian Prime Minister and Finnish President are filmed jogging with their wives in Hyde Park, we look at whether fitness and fitness for office go hand in hand. Making the running with us tonight, Sir Ranil Jayawardena and Hannah Bardell, who'll be with me for the next hour. It's Wednesday. I'm Ali Fortescue, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Politics Hub. Well, there's a pretty public tussle playing out this evening for the direction of the Labour Party, sparked by the former Deputy Prime Minister's words at an event last night. Angela Rayner said, "We cannot just go through the motions in the face of decline," and branded looming immigration reforms as un-British. So what is she up to? Is it a pitch for the leadership, a role in government? It was, at the very least, a easy target for Kemi Badenoch at PMQs.
The Prime Minister wants to talk about my leadership. I'm shocked because his former deputy has just fired the starting gun on the race to replace him. And I'll tell him one thing. She and I both agree that this weak man should be replaced by a strong woman.
We'll delve into Rayner's resurfacing with our panel and two Labour MPs from very different wings of the party. But first, our political editor, Beth Rigby, has been speaking to the Labour leader in Scotland, Anas Sarwar, who I'm sure you'll remember was the only and first senior figure in the Labour Party to call for Sir Keir to go.
Anas Sarwar, it's 50 days out until the Holyrood elections. In 2024, Labour took 37 seats from the SNP in the general election. It was the best performance since 2007. Labour was polling at 35% against the SNP at 30%. Back then, I think it's fair to say that it looked like you could be heading to becoming First Minister in 50 days. Since then, things have deteriorated quite drastically, with Labour trailing Reform in most of the polls. I know it's bounced back a bit in recent days. What's gone so wrong for you?
Look, I think it's safe to say that we have an unpopular UK Labour government, and that has caused a challenge, but we also have an unpopular Scottish SNP government. And let me just say why it's important.
But Keir Starmer's in London is more unpopular than the SNP government here, clearly.
But this election's not about Westminster.
But
it's not about Keir Starmer.
Though,
it's about Scotland, and it's about the First Minister.
Isn't that what's happening?
Well, I've been open about saying that this is an unpopular UK Labour government, and we have an unpopular Prime Minister. That's a statement of fact. But we also have an SNP government that's failed Scotland.
And Anas, you said in February 2026 that the leadership in Downing Street needed to change. You said there have been too many mistakes. We promised to be different, but too much has happened. Do you still think that?
Well, I've stated my position. I stand by. I don't recount or recall from that. But I'm not going to be a daily commentator on what's happening in Downing Street, because in 50 days' time, I want to change the occupant of Bute House and change the First Minister of Scotland, and that's going to be my relentless focus over the course of the next 50 days.
And I'm not expecting it's just it's the first time I've seen you since you called for
You're welcome
Keir Starmer
up to Scotland as often as you like, Beth. We'd love to have you here lots.
And I like being here, as you
days.
know. I like coming up to Scotland a lot. The question I had for you, though, the reason I'm asking you again now is, has the war in Iran and the Prime Minister's response to that not given you pause for thought in terms of his leadership and whether or not he might be the best person actually to stay as Prime Minister?
So what I'd say on that, Beth, is, look, I'm grown up enough, and I hope enough people are across the country, to recognise that just because you disagree with someone on one thing means you have to disagree with them everything. And if we look at the Iran conflict, I think the response from our Prime Minister and from Keir has been exemplary. I think he was right to say he would not join the offensive of Israel and Iran, something I think is illegal and has only made the region more dangerous and potentially the world more dangerous for all of us. I think he's been right to say that we will defend UK citizens in that region and our allies in that region with defensive infrastructure. And I think he's right to say that we need to see an immediate end to that conflict so people don't pay either in their lives in the region or their livelihoods here in this country. And I think he has had the right response to that conflict, and I think he deserves immense credit for that.
When you called for the Prime Minister to resign and no one followed you, in fact, some of them rounded on you in that the entire Cabinet came out in support of the Prime Minister, as did the Welsh First Minister, albeit a little later. Did that surprise you? It surprised me.
To be honest, it didn't surprise me because I'm not part of any coup. I wasn't part of any plot. I wasn't interested in what it meant for Westminster. I wasn't interested in what it meant for Westminster journalists or Westminster politicians. I'm only interested in what it means for Scotland.
Yeah.
Because I'm the person that's putting myself in front of the people of Scotland in 50 days' time. And people in Scotland have a right to know what are my standards, what are my principles, what am I willing to accept, and what would I do differently if I have the honour of being First Minister of my country.
So felt that
So I can totally get why lots of Westminster politicians and journalists thought, what does this mean for Westminster? Honestly, I don't care what it means for Westminster.
Well,
I only care about what it means for my country, Scotland.
Is May the crunch point for Labour?
Well, absolutely.
Are you going to stand down then if you don't become First Minister?
I'm going to win the election and I'm going to change this country. I genuinely believe that.
Would you, if it's a crunch point and you don't succeed, would you resign as Scottish Labour leader?
I believe we are going to succeed. I believe we are going to win. I believe we are going to elect a new First Minister, a new government. And let me tell you why. I was really open.
But would you consider resigning? I hadn't really thought of that before.
I'm only considering one thing, Beth, and that is how I win the election.
You're going to avoid...
And I'm determined to win that election.
You're going to avoid that question
I'm telling you that we're going to win the election in the 7th of May, but that requires us to persuade people across the country, and my job is to be a persuader, not a commentator.
Should Keir Starmer stand down after May if Labour fail in Scotland, if you don't succeed?
The election on the 7th of May is not about Keir Starmer.
If you've said in February that you think the Prime Minister should stand down because he is not delivering in the way that the country expected, and I say that for Scotland and the wider United Kingdom, and then he does very badly, or the Labour Party across the United Kingdom do badly in May, presumably you think he should resign. You thought he should resign in February.
Well, as I've already said to you, Beth, I've stated my position. I'm not recoiling from that position.
OK. How are things between you and Keir Starmer now? Presumably quite frosty.
Look, no, I've got a good relationship with Keir. I mean, as I said at that press conference, that was, of course, politically hard, but actually the politics of it was easier than the personal, because Keir Starmer is someone that I know, someone that I like, someone that I call a friend, and someone who I've spent a lot of time with. I know he is a good, decent man that wants to do the best by this country. So that was a very, very difficult position for me to take.
You phoned him before, didn't you, to tell him you were going to do it?
I did speak to him before, that's right.
And was he angry?
Well, of course he was going to be taken negatively. Of course he was going to be angry. But I think in fairness to him and to other members of the Cabinet, that hasn't meant the dialogue has stopped. We still have very positive conversations about what's right for Scotland and how we can make sure a UK Labour government is delivering for Scotland.
You presumably don't personally have one-on-one phone calls with him anymore, though, do you?
I've spoken to him a couple of times that week. I've not spoken to him since that week, but I'm in regular communication with him, yes.
Final question. In January, you said the best thing that Keir Starmer could do was to stay behind doors. Would you accept Keir campaigning here, the Prime Minister campaigning here in Scotland, or would that be unhelpful for you? So
I'm leading the campaign. I'm the candidate for First Minister. I think the Prime Minister has better things to do than be chapping doors during an election campaign. So I stand by what I said. He needs to focus on doing his job and demonstrating he's delivering for Scotland. And if he has announcements to make that demonstrate delivering for Scotland, of course, he's the Prime Minister of the country. He should be here making those announcements. But I'll be leading this campaign from the front because I'm the candidate for First Minister. It's me versus John Swinney. Keir Starmer's not standing to be First
Okay,
Minister.
Anas Sarwar, thank you very much for
My
your
absolute
time.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, let's get a bit more from Beth, shall we, with her take on what the Scottish Labour leader told her.
Look, what's going on here? The calculation for Sarwar here in Scotland is that he needs to distance himself if he has any hope of doing well in the Holyrood election. Such is the unpopularity of Keir Starmer here in Scotland. And he's trying to persuade people to vote for Labour, to hold their noses, if you like, and vote for Labour to get the SNP out of the First Minister and the governing position here in Holyrood in the Scottish Parliament. But he has no certainty about whether he will do that. I mean, in the polls, they've been coming in third, at times behind Reform. And while he's very bullish about his prospects, polling suggests he's going to really struggle to get past John Swinney. But that is a bigger reflection, really, of the problems that Labour have across the country, because it's not just here in Holyrood that they have a problem. In the Senedd in Wales, it looks like Labour will lose control of that for the first time in its history. And then in London, they're really worried about Zach Polanski and the Greens and the Green wave really causing them some damage there. And that's before I even get onto Reform and councils across England. So right across the piece, it's very difficult for Keir Starmer, and Anas Sarwar can see that, and he's tapping into that, trying to put distance between himself and the Prime Minister. I think the other thing that is worth saying, that these frustrations that Sarwar is talking about, they're now being voiced by other senior Labour figures. I hear a lot of it privately, but Angela Rayner, the former Deputy Prime Minister, went public on the record last night talking to MPs. She made a big broadside against the government's immigration reform. She described them as un-British, and she said that they were pulling the rug from hard-working families. She was referring to reforms that will make tough settlement rules for foreign nationals that came to the UK in the last 5 years, so tightening up the rules and making it harder for people to have a permanent right to remain. She was critical of that, and that will play into many Labour MPs. Over 100 MPs have signed a letter to Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, asking her to water down those reforms. But also Rayner's intervention sparked leadership speculation again, because she talked about Labour fighting for survival, and she talked about Labour running out of time. Now, given how febrile it is back in Westminster, this has just started banging the drum again, looking into May and wondering whether coming out of those elections there will be more pressure on Starmer to resign if they do very badly, and whether or not any of the cabinet, any other senior Labour politicians will go over the top in the way that Anas Sarwar did back in February, only to find no one then had joined him.
We're just going to bring you some breaking news on meningitis that is coming into us here in Sky News in the last few minutes. The UK Health Security Agency has given an update. It says the following: it is continuing to investigate an outbreak of meningococcal disease in Kent. As of 5 p.m. on the 17th of March, 9 laboratory cases are confirmed and 11 notifications remain under investigation, bringing the total to 26 of the confirmed cases are confirmed to be Group B meningococcal disease. Sadly, 2 people have died, with no further deaths since that last update. 1 individual who had resided in Kent presented to a London hospital with no community contacts in London. All those affected who are currently linked to the outbreak are young adults. UK HSA is aware of a baby with confirmed meningococcal Group B infection who is not currently linked to the outbreak, but UK HSA will continue to investigate this case. It goes on to say, given the severity of the outbreak and as an additional precautionary measure, a targeted vaccination programme will begin, starting with students that are residents of the Canterbury campus halls of residence at the University of Kent, who will be contacted directly. Initially, it's expected that up to 5,000 students will be contacted and offered the vaccine. So that's the latest from Kent. Right, let's bring our panel in for this evening, shall we? The former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Sir Ranald Jayawardena, and the former Scottish SNP MP, Hannah Bardell. Thank you both. A lot to talk about today. Once again, Angela Rayner, what do we think that she was up to last night, Hannah?
I mean, I think she's probably saying what lots of Labour MPs have been saying, both publicly and privately, for some time. I mean, you know, there's a reality to be faced about the immigration policy. It feels very much like Labour are chasing the tails of, you know, reform particularly, and it's not working, and it's not working for the left of the party, and it's going to do serious damage, economic damage. Brexit has done huge damage. We're now in the situation that 80% of migration is from outside of the EU. We can't fill lots of key vacancies in areas. The care sector has been decimated, and Shabana Mahmood's putting in place policies that are so discriminatory and so damaging to not just the economy, but to the fabric of our society. And I think Angela Rayner is reflecting that and now speaking out publicly. But it's not a surprise to anybody, I don't think. What the motivation is quite interesting. Is this her making a play now to kind of go for the leadership? She's obviously somebody that many see as a potential future leader. She's obviously had her tax issues, and potentially that's going to be behind her very soon. That's what the sense is from a lot of folk. But I think she's just reflecting not just views of folk on the left of the Labour Party, but also a lot of people in society and the concerns that they have.
I mean, yeah, it was scripted. It was 1,500 words, so it seems like it wasn't an accident. Ranald, you know, you saw these sorts of tricky situations play out in the Conservative Party when you were in power. I guess, you know, it's about the Labour MPs speaking potentially to the membership, but what about the voters?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think far be it for me to speak for the Prime Minister and defend his interests here within the Parliamentary Labour Party, but, you know, the country requires some clear, strong leadership. You know, there's some big challenges facing us all, wherever our politics might be, whether that's, you know, the energy costs going up, going through the roof for many people, whether that's youth unemployment now being higher than the Eurozone for the first time ever, people fearing crime and so on. And, you know, what people out there want is not arguments in Westminster, which is what seems to be happening. They want those problems solved. And I think having seen the way these things develop, over 12 years of Conservative leadership of the country, we got to this sort of point. It's taken them, well, just a little over 12 months to get to where they've got. And it's not what anyone really wants to see. It's not going to solve those problems. But it is interesting that Angela Rayner is saying this now. Maybe she's had a tip-off that she's going to be cleared of those tax affairs and that's all being resolved and she's gearing up. Who knows? Well,
some people think that she maybe just wants back into the Cabinet, and that potentially is a good position to be in if you did want to be future leader of the Labour Party.
Maybe into a future Cabinet. I'm not sure going directly against your, you know, current Cabinet and colleagues will get her back into the Cabinet. But I just think there is, you know, a fundamental point about how damaging those policies are. And, you know, there may be a part of her that just feels a duty to speak out as well, you know, because she's somebody that's quite clever and that's well liked, particularly within the left of her party. And, you know, when you look at her ratings, I mean, I haven't seen a recent poll, but previously she was much more liked versus Keir, for example. And also, there's a Scottish election and a Senate with membership, but also with the public. But we've got elections, you know, local elections across England, national elections in Wales, national elections in Scotland, and Labour, despite what Anas Sarwar might say, are not doing well, and it doesn't look like they're going to do well. So that will be a flashpoint for the Labour Party, and that will potentially give her or other potential candidates an opportunity.
Thank you both. We will come back to you. And Keir Starmer's future is sure to feature heavily on our late-night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 o'clock. Here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be the journalist and author Christina Patterson and the Daily Telegraph's political editor Tony Driver. Well, there is no question that on the issue of immigration, Labour MPs are divided. And it is not surprising because Labour voters are too. Take a look at this. This is YouGov polling for Sky News. And you can see that around half, 53% there of those people that were polled think that the level of immigration to the UK in recent years was too high. Those are the people that Shabana Mahmood, I'm sure, is aiming at. But still, look at this, a third, 32% of people think it is at the right level. Those are Labour voters. So are those the people that are nodding along with Angela Rayner's analysis? We'll contrast that with, say, the Tories and Reform, where over 90% of their voters think that immigration has been too high. Well, let's get a snapshot, shall we, of opinion amongst Labour MPs on their government's plans for immigration, because a little earlier I spoke to Jo White, who was the chair of the Red Wall group of Labour MPs. But first, let's hear from her fellow Labour MP, Neil Duncan-Jordan.
This is legal migration and immigration that we're talking about. These are people who came here legally, they have jobs, they are contributing in tax and the services that they provide to us as citizens. We're not talking about people who've come over on boats illegally and so on and so on. We're talking about people who are part of our community. Their children go to our schools. They're our next door neighbours. They're the doctors, the nurses that we go to see when we go to the hospital. So I don't really buy the argument that we have to double down on those sorts of people.
Do you think the government are listening to you? Do you expect that their plans will be watered down?
I hope so, very much. I mean,
Have you had signals of that?
Well, I haven't personally, and there are people who are talking to ministers about that. There needs to be a shift. There needs to be a change of narrative on this. You cannot have people who've given years of service to this country, paid their taxes, made a contribution in their community, and then tell them you're not welcome here anymore.
Do you think we're seeing a real split in Labour now? Do you think we're seeing kind of MPs trying to drive the Prime Minister in certain directions?
I don't know about a split in Labour. I mean, Labour's always been a broad church. Harold Wilson said for the party to fly like a bird, it needs a left and a right wing. I mean, what's happened recently is that the left wing's been squeezed out of the discussion. Where are those people in government? We should have the government of all the talents right across the spectrum of our political views. We haven't had that. We've had a concentration of a particular type of individual. We've had deep-seated factionalism in the Labour Party. That's not been good for making policy, in my view. We need to hear all the voices.
Do you think if the Prime Minister doesn't do that and doesn't bring more of the left in, he's in trouble?
I don't know whether he's in trouble. I mean, we've got the May elections coming up. People are saying already that the polls don't look particularly good. We shall see how that fares. There'll be an analysis of that. Of course, there'll be an autopsy after May, I'm sure, about his future. I mean, I have called for him to go in the past. I don't think it's the right leadership that we want. I think we need a different sort of leader. I've called that Andy Burnham should have been allowed to stand in Gorton and Denton. I understand that there's evidence out today to show that if he had, we would have won that seat. I think we've got to really look at ourselves very closely. Do we want the Labour Party to succeed, not just now, but at the next election? I think we do, and I think we probably need to change direction to do that.
My concern is that if we go down that route, we have no guarantee that we will be in government next time. We have to win seats like mine to guarantee a Labour majority. And it's no good talking about pushing the party in a certain way on immigration, because it will mean that we'll be sitting on the opposition benches next time and never, ever be able to deliver on our policies and our priorities to deliver economic prosperity and security for people right across the country.
Do you think the Prime Minister is being pushed in that direction? Do you worry that the immigration proposals are going to be watered down? Because there is some speculation that could happen.
No, I don't think. I think he understands where we have to be right now. He understands, I believe, in the priorities of my constituents and where this country has to push. You know, we do have a small votes crisis. Too many are still coming across, and we have to sort that. But also, we've had the highest population growth we've ever had in recent years. Over 2 million people coming into this country, and we have to get those numbers down. You
know, there is a real strength of feeling on the other side. There's this letter that was sent to Shabana Mahmood that was signed by more than 100 Labour MPs. Do you worry that the Prime Minister will be swayed by the strength of feeling on that side?
We're 411 MPs, and of course we're all entitled to different views and different opinions because we are a broad church, and that's what's valuable about us, that we are able to have those debates. But what is critical, that we are in government and we're listening to the priorities and the concerns of our constituents. And they are saying there is an issue with immigration and illegal immigration, and we have to focus on that, and we have to deliver very, very quickly on that.
What do you think Angela Rayner was up to last night? Do you think this was a pitch for the leadership or to be back in government?
As I said, we're a broad church. She's entitled to have her views and try to push, and she's entitled to try and push the Prime Minister in a certain direction. But I'm also entitled to have my views and tell the Prime Minister I think he's going in the right direction. So this is a debate which I wish we were not having out here in the open arena, because that's not the healthy way of doing things. But I'm very keen to push back and say, look, I'm here because my constituents have put me here, and one of the issues they want me to fight on and sort out is immigration, illegal immigration, and I'm pushing the Prime Minister to keep on going down that route.
And you're satisfied that's going to happen?
I believe it will.
Right, let's bring Ranil and Hannah back in, shall we? I mean, two really different... You'd forget that they were in the same party, two very different Labour MPs. I mean, it's hard to get the right policy on immigration, given that, as we saw from those graphs, you know, people are divided, aren't they?
I think it's hard when such a mess has been made, to be honest, and I've said it many times till I'm blue in the face, but Brexit plays a huge part in this. The choice to leave the European Union has left us with no policies, no safe and legal routes. The number of boats have increased, but it has also meant that we have lost crucial workers, and it's done a huge amount of damage to our economy. And Labour don't want to talk about that when that is very clearly one of the obvious answers. But they're also in the situation...
They are talking about close alignment with Europe this week.
They are, and that's good. But, you know, I remember putting this to a Labour MP at the time when we were discussing Brexit was, look, Labour think they're going to win the next election. Put it on the ballot paper. Say to people you'll have a referendum, because folk were sold a pup. They were told a whole pack of lies, and they voted on something that they didn't, you know, that was completely turned out to be not true and has done a huge amount of damage to society. And we're now in the position that instead of having more flexible, sensible policies that make sure that we meet the needs of the businesses and society, the government is just moving further and further to the right, and that's just going to do a huge amount of economic and social damage.
OK. Ranil, I can see you want to come in.
Well, yeah, I mean, where do I start? I mean, look, let's not rehash the Brexit debate. Let's focus on what's happening right now, which
but
is...
it's crucial and it's relevant.
Let's focus on what's happening right now and what people are facing. You know, they're seeing hotels across the country and indeed houses across the country being occupied with people who've come to this country illegally at great expense of the taxpayer. So it's no wonder, given pressures on public services, people are saying immigration is too high, illegal immigration in particular.
But I suppose, you know, for the Labour Party,
and,
a significant chunk of the Labour Party, 32%, I think it was, think that immigration is at the right level. So they've got to speak to those people as well.
Fine, but a greater proportion think it is too high. And indeed, many of the people who are now saying that they're going to vote reform, who were Labour voters in 2024, who helped secure that huge majority for Labour, they will only be won back if Labour deals with their priorities. And one of those, as you said, 90+% is immigration. So, you know,
what about people going to the Green Party?
Well, look, I know what it's like to fight on two fronts. You know, my party again has been there, and you've ultimately sometimes got to just do what you think's right. And you know, if this government thinks that actually clamping down on illegal migration and making sure that they've got the right controls on other legal routes, that is the way forward, then they should take that and through Parliament and get that. I'm not talking about legal routes for asylum. I'm talking about legal migration, people coming here to contribute to our economy, which, as you say, there has been a need for many, many years for that to take place. There is a points-based system, and they need to make sure that that is working for the United Kingdom.
But it doesn't work because we have huge gaps in our social care system and in many different parts of society. And what we're doing to people is putting a threshold so high and removing the right for people to bring their spouses if they study.
Yeah, but we also have the highest youth unemployment that we've ever had. It's never been higher here than in the Eurozone. It is now higher. So we've got to make sure also the right skills for our young people are being trained so that they can fill those jobs. We don't always want to fill jobs with people from other countries. We want to make sure that our own British citizens can
it's possible
actually
to do
get
both.
the right jobs. Well, we don't
I think it's a false equivalence.
We don't necessarily need
Hannah,
as many people as
is
we've
there
had.
a danger that Labour talk very tough on immigration but don't deliver? Is that the sort of worst of both worlds?
I mean, it is to some extent, but it's not just talk, is it? You know, we're finding ourselves in a situation, people can't come here to study, they can't come here to work. And so all this stuff about people in hotels, you know, that aren't willing to contribute, the vast majority of people that come here, in my experience, as I'm sure Ranulph's is as well, that when we had folk come into our office looking for support, you know, with immigration, there were people who wanted to work, there were people who wanted to contribute, or they were coming here because their country had been bombed or was facing famine or they were facing discrimination. And some of the countries they were coming from were countries that the UK had bombed. So I think we have to be really careful about the narrative. And what's happened is Reform have got a hold of this as an issue. They have stoked up fear and hatred against immigrants and against people coming from other countries that want to work. And that is driving, I think, a lot of Labour policy.
We're going to move on. Yeah, 99%, according to that poll, of Reform voters think immigration is too high. So that makes sense, I suppose. Well, as just mentioned, Labour also has a problem with the Green Party. And today, leader Zach Polansky gave his first major speech on the economy with this assessment on what he dubbed Rip Off Britain.
It doesn't have to be like this. Firstly, we've got to stop equating the government's finances with a household. This false equivalence has been a poison in British politics for far too long. Hospitals, schools, transport starved of investment, and that costs us every single day in money, in time, and in stress. And secondly, we need to exit the bond market doom loop. Our fiscal framework is hypersensitive to market movements. And this creates policy uncertainty that then fuels the very market jitters it was there to supposedly prevent.
OK, let's bring Ranul and Hannah back in, shall we? How worried... Ranul, I can see you're desperate to talk about this. I mean, his position, you know, the way he talks about markets does seem to have softened. As someone who was in Liz Truss's cabinet, you know the dangers of the market?
Well, for sure. And, you know, he clearly hasn't learned any lessons. You know, we, the Conservative Party, have apologised for mistakes that were made on all sorts of areas of policy. Kemi's been very clear about that. He's not learned any lessons. And in fact, Rachel Reeves is going to face some challenges with Iran as well, and the cost of energy, and whether she does an energy support package, which was a big amount of borrowing that we had to incur, which led to all sorts of things, as we know. But, you know, to hear that narrative that basically the UK government in the future, under this in this parallel universe that he is Prime Minister, should just ignore the bond markets, should ignore people who are lending money to this country.
I think the way he put it, he said...
is absolutely crackers.
We don't want to be in a bond market doom loop.
Yes. Exactly. Well, I mean, I have to say...
So it does seem to have shifted. It's more about not being constrained by them rather than ignoring them.
Which means that they're going to be really annoyed and they're going to withdraw their ability to fund UK debt. And, of course, that is the thing that has to trouble any Chancellor, any Prime Minister as well, that can you get your debt away when you need to issue it? And if you can't, that's going to lead not only to problems for UK in terms of refinancing, but also contagion across the market as a whole. So that's a really, really serious thing. But I guess we can't expect any less from someone who thinks that he can change the shape of someone's anatomy through hypnotism.
Hannah, do you think this is the bold, radical alternative that people are going to vote for?
Well, I mean, he's doing pretty well in the polls, south of the border particularly, and, you know, wasn't it that doom loop that got us into the mess in 2008 and the financial crash in the first place? I mean, I've got a lot of sympathy, and it's quite nice to see some of the SNP's greatest hits being covered by the Greens, you know, because, you know, the policies that he's been talking about, so trying to move away from that gross domestic product, GDP driver to more of a well-being economy is something that the SNP has been talking about, particularly in terms of local wealth and well-being. Things like putting the water companies into public ownership, that's something that we've had in Scotland and we have fought hard to protect. In fact, he referenced Scotland in his speech and talked about that. Public ownership of assets, so rail and infrastructure, instead of it all being driven by profits and being driven by, you know, those who benefit from that. You know, we've done that in Scotland. And, you know, he talked about the care sector as well, and he talked about, you know, free personal care, again, something that we've promoted in Scotland. So it's interesting to see, you know, the SNP doesn't stand politicians or candidates south of the border yet. Don't think it's ever going to. But, you know, a party that is, you know, fairly closely aligned with us and the SNP, pursuing similar policies south of the border and chasing the tail very closely of reform in the polls. So it shows that there is, I think, an appetite for real change, for more progressive policies, stuff that makes everybody feel part of society, where they are properly looked after and the safety net is there, but also that grows the economy in a more equal way. Because I think we can all recognise that there are big companies out there that are paying less tax than the average household in this country, and that's a problem.
Sorry, Ranald, unless you can get it into one or two words.
I just think polarisation of our politics is really quite a shame, because that means that we're going to lead to extreme outcomes like we've heard. OK,
thank you both. We're going to come back to you. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. Is this a merger too far? As US President jokes about a united Ireland, Sky News speaks to Northern Ireland's Deputy First Minister.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
A historic day here today.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
But what happens now?
Well, the conflict in the Middle East has prompted immediate spikes in oil prices and warnings of fuel rationing if the war is prolonged. The Reform UK leader, Nigel Farage, took the opportunity of a question at Prime Minister's Questions earlier today to ask Keir Starmer whether the government would change course and allow further exploration in the North Sea.
Over the course of the last year, our North Sea neighbours, Norway, have opened 49 drill sites for gas and oil. On our side of the North Sea, the number is 0. Given that our critical reserve of natural gas is down to 2 days and how vulnerable we are, and with talk potentially of energy rationing coming later this year, isn't it time we change course, got rid of excessive taxation on the exploration companies, opened up the licences, became self-sufficient in natural gas, and with that would come thousands of jobs, increased tax revenues, and cheaper gas prices. Isn't it time we followed Norway?
Well, our economics and data editor Ed Conway has been taking a look at how much oil and gas is left in the North Sea basin and how we might be able to boost our own domestic supply.
Now, it's sometimes forgotten, actually, that for a long time Britain was one of the biggest oil producers in the world. You may not remember this, but back in the 1980s, look at this. This is the world's top 25 oil producers. The UK was number 5 in 1986. Now, even by 2000, we were in the top 10. It's worth just remembering that when you kind of think back, I mean, to where we are now. So this is where we are now, 2024, we are back in 24th position. But remember that, we used to produce a lot of oil and gas out of the North Sea. However, now there's this kind of assumption that we're facing an inevitable decline. And if you look at gas production, so this is just gas production, oil production is kind of similar pathway. This is where the official projections from the North Sea Transitional Authority, the kind of group that does the kind of independent regulator, this is where the pathway that they've mapped out for where we go in the future. And, you know, it's a pretty clear chart, isn't it? It looks like there's not much upside. And actually, they say even if you had a little bit of extra exploration, that line could be a bit higher. But it raises the question, what if you assume that the tax environment, the regulatory environment is much more friendly towards oil producers, making it much more attractive for them to go out there into the North Sea and do more digging and more exploration? Well, OE UK, which is the group, the lobby group for all of those North Sea producers, they've done precisely that. And here is what they've found. They think, actually, gas production, it would still go down, but it would go down much less quickly. To the extent, and this is obviously a best-case scenario, but it's very different to that line, which a lot of people thought was, you know, in concrete, to the extent that in 2035, you have more than double the production in the North Sea than you do currently. Really striking. And if you look specifically at that period, well, just consider where the gas comes from at the moment. So right now, this is where our total gas demand, some of it comes from the UK, from the North Sea. Quite a lot of it comes from Norway, and then a chunk comes from liquefied natural gas. And a lot of that gets sent over to the continent. In 2035, if you assume that that line is just going to go down and down and down, this is how things look. So UK gas only provides 18% of all of the gas that we need, the North Sea. Norway provides still quite a lot because it has a bit more. But LNG, liquefied natural gas, the stuff that comes from Qatar, or doesn't right now, provides 46% of all of the UK's gas. That is the kind of official projection at the moment. But now assume that we do get more out of the North Sea, that that line I showed you a moment ago is indeed, you know, plausible. And here's how things look. Instead now, UK gas provides 57% of all of the gas that we're consuming, and LNG is down at 6%. Now, this is a projection. It's a best-case scenario, and we just don't know whether it's actually going to be borne out. But given the debate right now, given how much focus there is on the North Sea, and given the government has yet to even officially legislate for some of the new bans on extra licences it's planning for, there's some big questions that are going to be asked in the coming weeks.
OK, let's bring Ranil and Hannah back in. Ranil, I suppose, you know, the government's argument is they've got a whole firm, this is about green energy, jobs for the future.
Well, you should be able to do both. So, you know, here and now, this is about energy security. And so we have a resource in the North Sea. There are thousands of jobs in Scotland in particular that depend on it. And it would make sense to take our resources, use them now, whilst also delivering more zero-carbon energy, both renewables and also civil nuclear. So I think all of these things are compatible, but it's about providing that security, that resilience for the country. And we're seeing that, you know, when you have so little gas stored, you know, potentially there's the chance of lights going out. That's not where anyone wants to be. Plus, the cost of energy is very high and very troubling for so many people already, and it could go higher. So anything that can be done to provide that certainty, to provide that security, to provide that resilience must be a good thing.
And I have to say I'm slightly confused about the SNP position on drilling in the North Sea. What's your take?
I mean, my take is that this is a perfect example of why we should have been investing and legislating and putting the policies in place to develop renewable energy a long, long time ago. And the SNP had been advocating for that well before they were in power in 2007, but when they did get into power, you know, I worked for the then First Minister. I also spent 3 years working in the energy industry in Aberdeen before I was elected, and that was at a time when the oil price was high, and we were in the situation where the UK government was continuing to absolutely rinse the industry, take the money out of it, and not invest in future technologies or the grid. You know, there are many things about Norway that we can admire, and one of those is its energy fund, its oil fund, which if Scotland had had the ability to do that, if we'd been independent, for example, we could have done that, and we could do that still in the future with renewable energy. But in terms of the crisis that we currently face, We're in a situation where we have some of the most expensive energy in Europe. We have an incredibly, old grid, and it has not been invested in and upgraded. I don't know that drilling in the North Sea is the solution to this. It may be something that we have to consider.
New licences.
But I think at the moment we have to be looking at what we can be doing to make ourselves, yes, the most secure, but absolutely focusing with a razor-sharp focus on renewable energy. But exactly, I mean, what Ed's report is very good, and it does give a very good picture of why we are in such a precarious situation. But what it doesn't cover is what the opportunity would be if there was greater, turbocharged investment in renewable energy and bringing that very briefly around.
But I think it's about doing both, right? So, I think the government you're talking about was actually the last Labour government. Under the Conservatives, in fairness, we were generating more offshore wind power than I think any other country in the world, bar China. But some of the big decisions, like not building nuclear power stations, taken by Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats in that coalition, that's also why we are where we are now. So it's about all of these things as part of a mix.
It's about the windfall tax as well, and that needs to be much more flexible.
Sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. Let's talk now about the US president, who is known for his off-the-cuff remarks. But at the annual Speakers' Lunch in Washington on St Patrick's Day yesterday, he welcomed the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland by referencing Irish unity.
Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland, and they get along so well. I saw that. You get along very well together. That's the way it's supposed to be, huh? I don't know if I should be promoting merger. I love mergers, but I didn't know. We're going to get in a little trouble. We're going to get in more trouble with that than the beauty. But Emma Little Pengelly, thank you very much, Emma. Thank you very much.
Well, our US correspondent David Blevins caught up with Emma Little Pengelly a little earlier to ask her about the president's remarks.
Emma Little Pengelly, you are the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland and a unionist. What was your reaction to President Trump suggesting there should be a merger, Irish unity?
Of course, it was just a bit of banter. I think that was very clear when you listen to President Trump's speeches. He does highlight people in the audience, and he talks back and forth and he banters back and forth. But as he said, it would be more trouble than beauty. It's clearly a joke. But I think what's really positive about it actually is that he acknowledged that Northern Ireland is in the room. He knows Northern Ireland is in the room. I've engaged with him, in order to make sure that that is the case, and of course highlighting that he knows a little bit about the constitutional background and also the sensitivities.
Now, you call it a joke, but unionists didn't find it funny when Joe Biden joked about not letting people into the White House if they wore orange. So it's funny with President Trump, not Joe Biden?
Well, look, it's the president's humour. As I said, it's clearly a bit of banter. I think if you're clinging on to that as to have some sort of support for Irish unity or otherwise, it's a bit naff.
Now, you had a meeting with the president soon afterwards. Did you educate him on the political sensitivities? Did you explain why you want Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom?
Okay, I think when you look at his entire comments, he acknowledges that. I do think it was just banter, but I did say to him, no merger, we don't want a merger, unless, of course, the Republic of Ireland is joining, merging with the United Kingdom. But, it was a great opportunity to speak to the president about highlighting why I am in DC this week, why we have got a team of people from Northern Ireland in DC, and that's all about making sure that Northern Ireland is also at the heart of these St Patrick's Day events. It's a great opportunity not just to engage in Capitol Hill, to engage with the President, because this is all about building relationships, and those relationships lead to funding announcements, investments and collaborations.
But the First Minister, with whom you share power, who is in favour of Irish unity, has boycotted Washington this St Patrick's week over the war in the Middle East. Is that not something that's a concern for you?
Well, look, my view is that this week is much more than just even the visit or meeting with the President. I'm really pleased that we got a private meeting with the President, regardless of what you think of President Trump, regardless of whether you agree with his views or not. He's the democratically elected leader of the United States. The decisions that he makes has huge global impact. We see that week in and week out, and an impact also domestically in terms of Northern Ireland and the UK.
You talk about the importance of those engagements. Yesterday, the Mayor of New York, though, paid tribute to hunger strikers. The Governor of New York, when asked if she was in favour of Irish unity, said, yes, I am. So are unionists fighting a losing battle in the United States now?
Well, look, I think we need to step back from that and say, look, where is this influence coming from? It comes from many, many decades of, Irish republicanism coming to the US and influencing people at all different levels in all different places. I am here this week. I'm an unapologetic unionist. I'm very proud of being a unionist, but most of all, I love Northern Ireland. I want Northern Ireland to continue to exist. I want Northern Ireland to truly thrive.
Now, one person who's not an unapologetic unionist is the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister. Were you grateful for him rowing to the defence of the British Prime Minister in the Oval Office?
Well, look, this is a president who has very strong views on a wide range of issues, and those views he likes to articulate and articulate them robustly, and those views often evolve very rapidly depending on the context. Of course, I think that probably the Taoiseach stepping in was an indication of the positive relationship that he has with Keir Starmer. Of course, he would be more sympathetic perhaps to some of the positions taken by Keir Starmer in relation to this particular conflict. But of course, from the point of view of the President, he has strong views, he will express them, but of course those are likely to change as the situation evolves as well.
You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. Cool runnings where leaders and their wives meet in London. The obvious way to de-stress from international politics is a simple run round the park.
Coming up on the UK Tonight from 8, a nationwide alert warning all doctors in England to look out for the symptoms of meningitis. We'll be live in Kent, where the number of cases has now risen to 20. Also ahead, live to Windsor, the King speaking at a state banquet for the President of Nigeria. And we'll head to Hollywood to speak to the British sculptor who is celebrating Oscar success. All that much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
Those vivid colours of summer have faded now, but the trauma for everyone who witnessed what happened here hasn't gone away.
Devastation. We lost 3 of them.
Ruda Cabana's guilty pleas mean they won't have to relive what they saw in court, but everyone here tells you they'll carry it for the rest of their lives. You see people running red lights time after time after time. This is an offence that sometimes has the most awful of consequences.
When you speed through a pedestrian crossing, there is a risk that you could batter somebody to death. She filled our lives with light. She was innocent, she was happy.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
He had a beautiful death. He fell asleep in my arms. This is about a dying person's choice to die peacefully when they want to, on their terms.
Okay, there's a lot of firing going on.
Can you explain to me why? We're journalists, sir.
Let's go. Watch, wait, right, we're going to get in. Right, get in. Get in.
We just want to ask you a few questions about your involvement with ISIS. The next step for them quite often is getting on a boat and sailing illegally over into Europe.
Es un solo procesamiento, una sola sacada.
Whoa. Oh my goodness. Whoa. Oh my goodness. If you weren't affected, you'd be a bit of a strange person.
Turn off the camera. Turn around and go away.
Okay, but
listen, I told you 3 times. They saw 2 guys, 2 bad people.
There's an absolutely packed dinghy.
But that is what it's like. Sometimes you have to put in an awful lot of hard work. It's worth doing. I suppose it is what we do.
James Matthews from Sky News, Mr. Mamdani.
I have to be honest, when you said you were from Sky News, I just got very excited. Could you repeat the question one more time?
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent.
Well, for those who put on their trainers for a weekend job, the very last thing they may want is a camera crew to record every moment for posterity. Asking their partner to come along may also provoke a speedy response. But for the world's elite, a run in the park is a very different endeavour. Cue Finland's President Alexander Stubb meeting up with the Prime Minister of Canada and their wives for a sprint around Hyde Park when their schedules crossed in London, and all filmed for social media, naturally. OK, let's bring in Ranel and Hannah, shall we? I mean, this is the quest for authenticity. I'm sure you've grappled with this as well. And it can, I don't know what you think, look slightly staged, Hannah.
Yeah, I mean, it did feel a bit staged, but I can't really criticise as somebody who occasionally went for a run. I'm not sure I would have put it across social media. I don't think anybody would want to see either of us sweating it out,
Certainly
running around the park. But, John Swinney does a lot of running, and he often talks about it, to promote health and well-being, not necessarily filming it with whatever leader he's met. So I think it's just a symptom of politicians and leaders trying to engage in a different way, and I'm not sure they pulled it off that well this time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a fine line, isn't it, between being performative and authentic?
For sure. I mean, as Hannah says, I mean, I don't think being on a run is a very pretty look for anyone. And,
Is it real grit?
Let me take the Politics Hub on a run the next time.
That is a great idea.
Well, when you said you were warning us, we thought it could have been that. But no, I mean, we remember the photos of Boris, right? And,
Yeah, Matt Hancock, yeah.
Quite. And so, actually, this looks all the more fake because it doesn't look normal, it doesn't look real. And so actually they're undermining their own attempt to appear authentic. But I think it's absolutely right and proper for politicians of all persuasions to just say a little bit more and indeed perhaps show a bit more of what goes on in their real lives. There's nothing wrong with that. But
should you drag your spouse into it?
If they're up for it, then that's fine. But that's got to be their call.
I'm not sure my wife would thank me for that. I think there's a real point about that. So much of what's happening now about politicians is that kind of hatred and abuse that's directed towards them. I don't think we see enough of the reality of what the job is like and how difficult it is for them and their staff. And I do think that there's more of that is needed because, and we need to make politics more real for folk and more tangible and make it more accessible. And I think I can see where they were going with it. Just not sure they quite.
It's just too glossy, isn't it?
It's a bit too glossy.
But I suppose the reality of reading a boring document is perhaps not so social media glossy.
But there's also lots of great things that any politician will be able to do. I remember my time as Minister for Trade, and you get to meet so many great businesses across the country, and it's great to showcase what they're doing, and that's very real. That's a core part of the job. It's not all about reading papers or speaking to people in Westminster. So you can demonstrate what you're up to, whilst also perhaps taking a few photos of you, going and watching cricket or whatever else. You don't have to pretend you're at the heart of everything.
OK, well, you two have been at the heart of the Politics Hub this evening. Hannah and Ranel, thank you so much for joining us. That is it from us tonight. We will be back tomorrow at 7 o'clock with the Politics Hub. Up next, it is UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. After that, it will be The World Tonight with Yalda Hakim, who will have the latest on Iran. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.